The boarding gate was loud and crowded, filled with rolling bags, tired voices, and the smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times. People stood in loose lines, checking their phones, watching the screen above the counter, and sighing as the minutes passed. In the middle of it all stood a man holding a small child on his hip. The child's head rested against his shoulder, eyes half closed, fingers gripping the collar of his shirt. The man looked worn in a quiet way. His jacket was clean but old. His shoes had been repaired more than once. His face carried the kind of calm that came from long nights without sleep and days spent doing what had to be done. He shifted his weight gently so the child would not wake. When the line moved, he stepped forward carefully, making sure the bag on his back did not bump anyone. Around him were people dressed in press suits and shiny shoes. Some talked loudly on their phones about meetings and deadlines. Others laughed as if this flight was just another small step in a busy life. No one paid much attention to the man with the child, and that was fine with him. He preferred it that way. When the boarding call came, he showed his pass and walked down the narrow hallway into the plane. The cool air inside carried the familiar smell of metal and recycled air. He found his seat in the economy section near the middle. It was a window seat, which he liked. The child stirred slightly as he sat down, but did not wake. He placed a small backpack under the seat in front of him and buckled his seatbelt with slow, careful movements. The child had grown lighter over the years, or maybe he had grown stronger. Either way, holding the child felt natural, like breathing. A few rows ahead, the first-class cabin buzzed with a different kind of energy. Wide seats, quiet laughs, glasses clinking softly. One man in particular stood out. He spoke with confidence, his voice cutting through the cabin like it owned the space. He wore a tailored suit and an expensive watch that caught the light every time he moved his hand. He joked with the flight attendant, then leaned back as if the seat had been built just for him. As the rest of the passengers filed in, the man with the child struggled slightly to lift a small carry-on into the overhead bin. His arm trembled for a second, and he paused, catching his breath. A flight attendant noticed and stepped over to help. She smiled kindly and took the bag from him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I didn't want to wake him." The flight attendant nodded and secured the bag. "No problem at all. Let me know if you need anything." From the first-class section, the suited man watched the scene with a faint smirk. He leaned toward the person beside him and muttered something under his breath. His voice was low, but not low enough. "Guess economy comes with free babysitting now," he said, letting out a short laugh. "Some people really shouldn't be flying." A few people nearby chuckled nervously. Others looked away, pretending they had not heard. The flight attendant stiffened for a moment, but said nothing. The man with the child heard every word. His jaw tightened slightly, but his face remained calm. He did not look up. He simply adjusted the child blanket and stared out the window. Outside, ground crew moved like small figures on the wide runway. The engines hummed softly as the plane prepared for departure. The child finally woke, blinking and rubbing tired eyes. "Are we there?" the child whispered. "Not yet," the man replied, smiling gently. "We have a little while to go." The child nodded and leaned back against him, trusting completely. The man rested his chin lightly on the child's head. The words from the front of the plane still echoed in his mind, but he pushed them aside. He had learned long ago that responding to pride often led nowhere. As the plane began to taxi, the safety instructions played over the speakers. The man listened out of habit, even though he knew them by heart. His eyes followed each movement of the flight attendants as they demonstrated the procedures. His posture was relaxed but alert, like someone who noticed details without trying. The suited man up front waved away the safety card with a bored flick of his hand. He was already back on his phone, typing messages and smiling to himself. He spoke again, louder this time, complaining about the delay and the quality of the coffee. The plane lifted off smoothly, rising into the sky. The city below shrank into a patchwork of lights and shadows. The child pressed a face against the window, amazed by the view. "Look," the child said softly. "I see," the man answered. "It's beautiful." As the seatbelt sign turned off, the cabin settled into a steady rhythm. Some passengers slept. Others watched movies or worked on laptops. The man closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle vibration of the plane wash over him. For a brief second, memories surfaced. Different planes, louder engines, sharper turns, voices over headsets. He pushed those thoughts away just as gently as they had come. A little later, the child grew restless and shifted in the seat. "Can I have some water?" the child asked. "Of course." The man waited until a flight attendant passed by and raised his hand slightly. She stopped and handed him a cup of water with a smile. As he took it, the suited man glanced back again, rolling his eyes. "Unbelievable," he said to no one in particular. "People like that always need special attention." This time, a woman sitting nearby frowned and shook her head, but still said nothing. The man with the child pretended not to hear. He thanked the flight attendant and helped the child drink carefully. The hours passed slowly. The lights dimmed. The sound of the engines became a steady background noise. Most of the cabin slept. The man stayed awake. He always did on flights. His eyes moved calmly, taking in the space, the people, the small changes in sound and motion. It was not fear. It was habit. The suited man eventually fell asleep too, his confident smile gone, mouth slightly open, unaware of anything beyond his seat. Far ahead, behind a locked door, the cockpit lights glowed softly. The pilot spoke in low, steady voices as the plane cut through the dark sky. Everything felt normal, safe, routine. The man with the child adjusted the blanket once more and rested a hand gently on the small back. He had no idea that before this flight was over, every life on board would depend on calm hands and quiet courage. For now, he was just a single father in an economy seat, watching over his child, letting the plane carry them forward into the night. The cabin lights stayed dim as the plane moved smoothly through the night sky. Most passengers were asleep now. Soft breathing, faint snores, and the quiet hum of the engines filled the space. The kind of calm that makes time feel slower. The single father sat still, the child asleep against his chest again. One arm rested protectively around the small body. His eyes were open, not wide with fear, just alert. He watched the aisle, the ceiling, the slight movement of the wings when the plane adjusted its path. To anyone looking, he seemed like any other tired parent refusing to rest. A gentle shake passed through the plane. Nothing unusual. Someone coughed. A few people shifted in their seats. The seatbelt sign remained off. Then another shake came, stronger this time. A woman a few rows back opened her eyes and frowned. Someone muttered something about turbulence. The plane dipped slightly, then leveled out. The engines changed pitch for a moment before returning to normal. The single father felt it in his chest before his mind fully registered it. A small change. A sound that didn't quite belong. He glanced toward the wing. The lights blinked as usual, but his focus stayed on the vibration beneath his feet. The child stirred. "It's okay," he whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else. In the first-class cabin, the suited man woke with a jolt. He looked around, annoyed, and adjusted his seat. "What was that?" he said loudly. No one answered him. The flight attendants remained calm, moving slowly through the cabin, checking on passengers. One offered a reassuring smile. "Just a bit of air movement," she said. "Nothing to worry about." The suited man scoffed. "Figures. I pick one flight, and—" He stopped mid-sentence as the plane shook again. Harder this time. A few gasps echoed through the cabin. Overhead bins rattled softly. A child somewhere began to cry. The seatbelt sign flicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the speakers, steady but serious. "Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The announcement ended without its usual friendly tone. No jokes, no reassurances. The single father adjusted his grip and fastened the belt across both of them. The child woke fully now, eyes wide. "What's happening?" the child asked. "Just some bumps," he said gently. "I've got you." Another drop followed, sharper. The plane dipped enough to make stomachs lift. Someone screamed. The suited man grabbed the armrest, his confident voice gone. "This isn't normal," he said, panic creeping in. The engines changed sound again, lower, uneven. That sound made the single father's shoulders stiffen. His eyes closed for a brief second as his mind shifted gears. He listened carefully now, blocking out everything else. A few minutes passed that felt much longer. The plane rocked side to side. Flight attendants hurried to their seats. Then the oxygen masks dropped. Yellow cups fell from the ceiling, swinging gently before coming to rest within reach. A wave of fear rushed through the cabin. People shouted. Some froze. Others struggled to get the masks on. The single father moved without panic. He pulled one mask down, placed over the child's face first, just like the instructions said. Then he secured his own. The child's breathing slowed as the oxygen flowed. "It's okay," he said again, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. The suited man fumbled with his mask, hands shaking. "Why are these down?" he shouted. "What's going on?" No one answered him. From the front of the plane came hurried voices, muffled behind the cockpit door. The captain's voice returned, this time more tense. "We have a situation in the cockpit," he said. "We are working through it." That was all. The silence that followed was heavy. The plane jolted again and steadied. Lights flickered briefly. A few passengers began to pray. Others cried quietly. Some stared straight ahead, frozen. The single father felt the plane's response to control inputs. Small corrections. Delayed reactions. Something was wrong. Very wrong. A flight attendant unbuckled despite the sign and moved toward the cockpit, holding on to seats as the plane shifted. Her face was pale, her jaw tight. Moments later, the intercom clicked on again. This time it was her voice, trembling but trying to stay professional. "Attention," she said. "If there's anyone on board with military aviation experience, advanced flight training, or experience flying high-performance aircraft, please identify yourself to a crew member immediately." The words echoed through the cabin. People looked at each other in confusion. "What does that mean?" someone whispered. The suited man laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous," he said. "What kind of airline asked that?" No one laughed with him. The single father stayed seated. His eyes were fixed forward now, focused, thoughtful. He looked down at the child, still breathing calmly through the mask. His mind raced through possibilities. Systems, failures, altitude, speed. Another announcement came, shorter this time. "Please, if anyone can help, come now." The urgency was clear. A man 2 rows ahead stood briefly, then sat back down, shaking his head. A woman whispered that her cousin flew small planes, but she didn't. Seconds stretched. The suited man's breathing grew fast. "Someone do something," he demanded, his voice cracking. The single father closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his expression had changed. The quiet tiredness was gone. In its place was focus, sharp and controlled. He gently lifted the child, placed him into the seat beside him, and tucked the blanket around small shoulders. "I'll be right back," he said softly. The child reached out and grabbed his sleeve. "Don't go." He smiled calm and steady. "I promise. I won't be far." He raised his hand slightly. A nearby flight attendant noticed and hurried over, crouching beside him. "Yes," she asked. "I may be able to help," he said quietly. She looked at him, really looked this time, not at his worn jacket or simple shoes, but at his eyes. Something in her expression shifted. "What kind of experience?" she asked. He took a breath. "Fighter aircraft. Emergency control situations. I haven't flown commercially in years, but the basics don't leave you." Her eyes widened. Behind them, the suited man let out a sharp laugh. "You," he said loudly. "You got to be kidding me." The single father did not turn around. The flight attendant placed a hand on his arm. "Please come with me," she said. As he stood, the plane shook again, harder than before. The laughter stopped. Fear filled the space where arrogance once lived. The single father took one last look at the child, then followed the flight attendant toward the front of the plane, stepping carefully as the aircraft continued its uneven path through the dark sky. The aisle felt longer than before. As he followed the flight attendant toward the cockpit, every pair of eyes in the cabin seemed to be on him. Some looked hopeful, some looked doubtful, some were simply afraid. The plane shook again, not violently, but enough to remind everyone that time mattered. He held on to the tops of the seats as he moved forward. His steps were steady. Inside, his heart was beating fast, but not from panic. It was a kind of fast that comes before action, The kind he'd felt years ago, in a very different uniform, in a very different sky. Behind him, the suited man stared in disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're trusting him?" No one answered. At the front of the cabin, the flight attendant knocked quickly on the cockpit door. It opened just enough to let them in. Inside, the air felt tighter. The lights were brighter. Warning sounds filled the small space in short, sharp bursts. One of the pilots sat slumped slightly to the side, pale and barely conscious. The other gripped the controls, sweat on his forehead, eyes locked on the instruments. "He says he has fighter aircraft experience," the flight attendant said quickly. The remaining pilot glanced back for half a second. That was all it took. He saw something in the man's posture. Not fear, not pride. Focus. "What did you fly?" the pilot asked. "High-speed jets," he answered. "Combat trained. Emergency procedures certified." The pilot nodded once. "We lost partial control of one engine. Hydraulics are unstable. I'm fighting the trim. I need another set of hands." There was no ceremony, no time for long explanations. "Sit," the pilot said. He slid into the empty seat smoothly, hands hovering over the controls for a split second before touching anything. He scanned the dashboard. Altitude, speed, engine output, fuel balance. His mind organized the information quickly. The plane dipped slightly again. "Easy," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The pilot explained the issue in short phrases. Warning lights had flashed. One engine was not responding correctly. The aircraft was still flying, but it needed careful handling. Too much correction could make things worse. "I'll take trim adjustments," he said calmly. "You manage throttle." The pilot gave a tight nod. In the cabin, the announcement had ended, leaving passengers in tense silence. The suited man leaned forward in his seat, trying to see past the curtain. His earlier confidence had completely disappeared. His fingers tapped the armrest without rhythm. A woman nearby whispered, "Do you think he knows what he's doing?" He swallowed hard but did not answer. Back in the cockpit, the man's hands moved with care, not rushed, not hesitant. Each movement had purpose. He adjusted the trim slowly, feeling the aircraft respond beneath him. The shaking eased slightly. "Good," the pilot breathed. They worked in quiet coordination. No shouting, no panic, just steady voices and constant checking. "How long since you flew?" the pilot asked. "Years," he answered truthfully. "But some things stay with you." He did not say why he had stopped flying. There was no space for personal history in that moment. Another warning light blinked. "Pressure's dropping," the pilot said. "I see it." He adjusted again. Thinking ahead, the key was balance. Keep the aircraft stable. Avoid sudden inputs. Guide it, don't fight it. In the cabin, the turbulence softened a little. Passengers noticed. The oxygen mask still hung down, but breathing became easier. A few people dared to look around instead of closing their eyes. The child in the middle row clutched the blanket tightly, eyes fixed on the front of the plane. A flight attendant knelt beside the seat. "Your father is helping," she said gently. The child nodded slowly, trusting those words. Up front, the remaining pilot wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "We need to prepare for an emergency landing," he said. "Nearest airport?" The pilot gave a location and distance. He calculated quickly. Wind direction, descent rate, fuel. "We can make it," he said firmly. That certainly mattered. The pilot contacted air traffic control, explaining the situation. His voice was steady but strained. Clearance was granted immediately. The man adjusted the descent carefully. The aircraft responded better now, though not perfectly. One wrong move could still cause trouble. "You've done this before," the pilot said quietly. "Yes, not in this exact plane, not in this exact moment." But he knew pressure. He knew responsibility. He knew what it meant when lives depended on calm hands. A memory flashed in his mind. Roaring engines, clear blue sky, a voice in his headset giving commands. He pushed it aside. This was now. This mattered more. Another small drop shook the plane. He corrected smoothly. "Nice catch," the pilot said. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The airport lights eventually appeared in the distance, tiny and steady against the dark ground below. "There," the pilot whispered. He saw them too. "Let's bring them home," he said. In the cabin, the captain's voice came through again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for an emergency landing. Please follow all crew instructions." Gasps filled the air, but the earlier chaos had faded. The movements of the plane felt more controlled now. The suited man gripped his seatbelt tightly. His mind replayed his earlier words. The smirk, the joke, the laughter. Now the man he had mocked was sitting behind a locked door, guiding the aircraft through the night. The plane descended steadily. The runway grew larger in the windshield. "Speed is good," the pilot said. "Hold it steady," he replied. The ground rushed closer. For a brief second, there was complete silence in the cockpit. Just focus. Then the wheels touched the runway. A hard but controlled impact. The aircraft bounced slightly, then settled. Brakes engaged. The engines roared in reverse. The plane slowed. Inside the cabin, passengers held their breath. Finally, the aircraft rolled to a full stop. Silence. Then applause exploded through the cabin. Loud, emotional, unstoppable. In the cockpit, he exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. The pilot looked at him with deep gratitude. "Thank you," he said. He simply nodded. Through the cockpit window, flashing lights from emergency vehicles surrounded the plane, but the danger had passed. He thought of one thing only, his child. As the doors opened and crew began procedures, he stood up quietly. "You should come out with us," the pilot said. "They'll want to thank you." He shook his head slightly. Later, he stepped back into the cabin. People turned immediately. Some were crying. Some were smiling through tears. A few reached out to touch his arm as he passed. He did not slow down. He reached his seat. The child looked up, eyes shining. "You came back," the small voice said. He knelt down and pulled the child into his arms. "I told you I would." Around them, applause continued. But in that moment, it felt distant. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a father who had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. The plane sat still on the runway, surrounded by flashing lights that painted the windows in red and blue. The engines were quiet now. The sudden calm felt unreal, like the moment after a storm when no one is sure if it is truly over. Inside the cabin, people were standing, crying, hugging strangers. Some laughed out of pure relief. Others stayed seated, hands shaking, trying to understand that they were still alive. The single father stayed low in his seat, the child wrapped tightly in his arms. He rocked gently, whispering soft words that only the two of them could hear. The child's face was pressed into his chest, small fingers gripping his jacket, as if letting go might make everything start again. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe." A flight attendant approached, her eyes red, her smile trembling. "You saved us," she said. "All of us." He shook his head slightly. "We did what we could." She swallowed and nodded, then moved on to help others. Further up the aisle, the suited man stood frozen near his seat. His expensive jacket hung open, wrinkled. His hair was out of place. He looked smaller now, like the air had been taken out of him. He watched the man holding the child, watched the way people touched his shoulder in thanks, watched the calm that surrounded him. The words he had spoken earlier replayed in his mind. The joke, the smirk, the careless judgment. For the first time in a long while, he felt ashamed. As emergency crews waited outside, the captain's voice came over the speaker, softer this time. "Please remain seated while we complete safety procedures. Assistance is on the way." The applause slowly faded into quiet conversation. People began calling loved ones, voices shaking as they explained what had happened. The suited man took a step forward, then stopped. He cleared his throat, unsure of himself. When the aisle finally cleared, he walked slowly toward the middle rows. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low. The single father looked up, surprised but calm. He did not stand. "I spoke out of place," the suited man continued. "I judged you. I was wrong." There was no excuse in his voice, only truth. The single father listened, then nodded once. "It's done," he said simply. The suited man hesitated. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, I have connections, resources. The single father adjusted the child's blanket. Just remember next time, he said. That's enough. The suited man swallowed hard and stepped back, words failing him. One by one, passengers began exiting the plane. Emergency workers guided them down the steps onto the runway. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of fuel and wet pavement. As the single father stepped outside with the child in his arms, cameras flashed from a distance. Voices called out questions. Someone shouted the word hero. He turned his face away, shielding the child's eyes. A paramedic approached, checking them both. Any injuries? No, he replied. You sure? He nodded. The paramedic smiled. You did good. He said nothing. Nearby, the suited man stood alone, watching as reporters crowded toward the cockpit crew. He felt invisible, and for once, he did not mind. The night stretched on. Passengers were guided to buses. Blankets were handed out. Water bottles passed from hand to hand. The single father sat on a low step near the edge of the runway. The child finally asleep again. He stared at the ground, exhaustion settling into his bones. A police officer approached, respectful and calm. They may want a statement, he said. Later, when you're ready. Okay. The officer paused. You flew before. Yes. Long time ago? He nodded. The officer didn't press further. Across the tarmac, the suited man watched the quiet exchange. He thought about all the times he had spoken loudly to feel important. All the times he had ignored people who did not look powerful. Tonight, power had looked very different. Hours later, passengers were finally moved into the terminal. The airport was quiet that hour, its bright lights reflecting off polished floors. As people gathered their belongings, many stopped to thank the single father again. Some hugged him, some cried, some simply placed a hand over their heart. He accepted it politely but briefly, always returning his attention to the child. The suited man stood near the exit, watching. When the single father passed him, the suited man spoke again. I won't forget this, he said. The single father met his eyes. You shouldn't. Then he kept walking. Outside the terminal, the first hint of morning touched the sky. Pale light stretched across the horizon, soft and quiet. The single father sat on a bench, waiting for a ride. The child slept against his shoulder, peaceful now. He thought about the past, about how life had turned when he least expected it, how flying had once been everything, how leaving it behind had felt like losing part of himself. But looking down at the child, he felt no regret. Inside the terminal, the suited man stood still, watching through the glass doors as a man and child faded into the early morning light. For the first time, success felt empty without humility. The night that had started with quiet judgment ended with a lesson that would follow him far longer than any flight ever could. Morning came slowly. The city outside the airport woke up as if nothing unusual had happened. Cars moved along the roads. Shops opened their doors. People complained about small delays and spilled coffee. Life continued, unaware of how close hundreds of people had come to never seeing this day. The single father sat in the back seat of a quiet car as it pulled away from the terminal. The child slept beside him, head resting against his arm, breathing slow and even. He watched the passing lights and felt the weight of the night finally settle into his body. Exhaustion reached places adrenaline had hidden. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a parent who had done what was needed and now just wanted rest. When they reached home, he carried the child inside without waking them. The small apartment was simple and clean. Toys lined one corner of the room. A few drawings were taped to the fridge. He laid the child on the bed and tucked the blanket carefully around small shoulders. Sleep, he whispered. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the steady breathing, letting the silence wash over him. Later that day, his phone buzzed for the first time since the flight. Messages had piled up. Missed calls, news alerts. People had shared photos taken from inside the plane. The story was spreading fast. He turned the phone face down. He made breakfast, toast, eggs, simple things. The normal routine grounded him more than anything else could. Across town, in a tall building of glass and steel, the suited man sat alone in his office. The city stretched below him, but he did not look at it. His phone buzzed nonstop as well. Messages from colleagues, board members, reporters asking for comments. He ignored them. His mind replayed the flight again and again. The laughter, the words spoken too easily. The moment the oxygen masks fell and confidence vanished. And then the image that would not leave him. A quiet man standing up when no one else could. He closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For years, he had believed success made him important. That power made him right. One night had stripped that illusion away. Back at the apartment, the child finally woke up. Did the plane really break? The small voice asked. Yes, he said honestly. And you fixed it? He smiled faintly. I helped. The child thought about this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Can we go to the park today? He laughed softly. If you feel up to it. They went later that afternoon. The sun was warm. The park was full of families. Children ran across the grass, laughing. Parents watched from benches, lost in small conversations. No one recognized him. He pushed a swing. He tied shoelaces. He listened to stories about imaginary adventures. Life felt normal again. A few days later, an official letter arrived, thanking him for his actions and inviting him to speak to investigators. He agreed, quietly, answered questions honestly, and left it at that. He refused interview requests, declined offers of reward. He had already been paid enough. Peace mattered more. Weeks passed. The suited man watched an internal meeting end early. He dismissed the room and stayed behind. On his desk sat a short note he had written but never sent. It said very little, just an apology, a thank you, and a promise to do better. He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. That evening, the single father received an unexpected knock at his door. When he opened it, the suited man stood there, no jacket, no confidence in his posture. Just a man. I hope this is okay, he said. The single father studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. They sat at a small table. The child colored quietly nearby. I won't take much of your time, the suited man said. I just needed to say this in person. He spoke slowly, carefully. I spent my life believing respect came with titles, with money. That night showed me how wrong I was. The single father listened without interrupting. I don't expect forgiveness, the suited man continued. But I needed you to know you changed something in me. Silence followed. Finally, the single father spoke. Just be kinder, he said. That's enough. The suited man nodded, eyes wet, and stood to leave. At the door, he turned back once more. Thank you. After he left, the apartment felt quiet again. Years later, the story still circulated online. It was retold in short videos and long articles. Details changed. Some added drama. Some missed the point. The single father never corrected them. He went on with his life. The child grew older, stronger, more curious. One evening, while doing homework, the child looked up and asked a simple question. Why don't you fly planes anymore? He thought for a moment. Because sometimes, he said gently, the most important place to be isn't in the sky. The child smiled and went back to work. Outside, planes crossed the sky, lights blinking softly in the distance. The single father watched them without longing. He had already landed exactly where he needed to be.